it's Fiona Masterson from the Learning Reservoir. In this video, I'm going to explain to you what is FMEA, Failure Mode Effect Analysis. That's the acronym for Failure Mode Effect Analysis. It's FMEA. It's a risk assessment tool. It's a systematic approach to prioritize risks associated with specific causes. It's used to identify ways of eliminating or reducing the causes, and it results in a documented plan to prevent the possible failures of a product or service. So it's fantastic because it helps you prioritize potential risks in your system or your product or your design. It helps you identify ways of eliminating or reducing the causes of those potential defects. And you have to document the process in an FMEA. So you have a documented plan that everybody understands what are the risks associated with a particular process. So it's always good to document these things so everybody understands what they're working towards. It was developed in the 1940s by the US military and then adopted by NASA in the 1960s, and into the 1980s it went into the automotive industry, and now it is widely adopted across all industries. So let's look at a coffee maker as an example of how to do a failure mode effect analysis risk assessment activity. So in FMEA, there's a particular type of language or terms that you use when you talk about FMEA. And the first one I'd like to introduce you to is the failure mode. So it's a key component of FMEA, failure mode. Well, what is it? Well, it is the way in which a process, a product, or a system or a design could fail to perform its intended function. So if we look at the coffee maker, if it wasn't to work as you would expect it to work, what could go wrong? What are the failure modes for that coffee machine? Well, one of them might be the coffee could be too hot. The coffee might not be hot. The coffee machine might not deliver the correct quantity of coffee into your cup. The coffee machine might leak. So there are all the different things that could go wrong. So you can see why it's a really good activity at FMEA, because you get a cross-functional team of people together, your designers, your engineers, your production team, your health and safety officers, lab people perhaps, depending on what industry you're in, and you all sit down and brainstorm what could go wrong with this coffee maker. Perhaps you're doing an FMEA at the design phase, so you do this brainstorming activity at that phase, or maybe you're doing a process FMEA. Maybe you're critiquing a process, a filling process, for example. What could go wrong during the filling process? You won't fill your bottles to the right volume. You might not fill them at all. So you list all, and they're all failure modes. What could go wrong? So that's a very important term, a failure mode in FMEA. The next term is you need to understand is the effects of the failure. So that's a key concept in FMEA. So if your coffee maker does not work as it should for each of those FMEAs, what is the consequence or impact of that particular failure mode on the overall system or process or end users? So what you do is for each thing that you identified could go wrong, i.e. the failure mode, you have to identify the effect of that failure. So if the coffee is not hot, well, what is the effect of that failure? Well, the coffee is therefore cold, leading to an unsatisfactory customer experience. If your failure mode is that the coffee is too hot, the effect of the failure might be you could burn the customer's tongue, for example. So for every failure mode that you identify, you have to identify the effect of the failure. So now we're starting to understand those failures more by doing this. The next concept in FMEA is the severity of the failure. So we want to understand how severe that failure is if it was to occur. And here in FMEA, you have a rating system, which is fantastic. So you put a number to the severity of the failure. So it's not arbitrary. It's not my opinion. It's not your opinion. No, we're going to put a number down regarding severity. So severity of the failure is a rating that describes the seriousness of the effect of the failure mode on the system or customer. It is usually rated on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most severe. So for example, our coffee maker, our failure mode again was the coffee is not hot. The effect of the failure is the coffee is cold, leading to an unsatisfactory customer experience. Now the severity of the failure. If that was to happen, if your customer was to get a cold coffee, what would the severity of that be? Well, it potentially could be 8, because you have an unsatisfied customer and you don't want that. Nobody wants a cold coffee. Now, however, if the failure mode had been the coffee is too hot, and the effect of the failure would be that you would burn your customer's tongue. Well, the severity of that failure would be a 10 severity. The next component of FMEA is the occurrence. So occurrence is a rating that describes the frequency with which the failure mode is likely to occur. So how often does your coffee machine produce a cold coffee? That's what you're looking for. That's what occurrence is all about. And again, you can use a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most frequent and 1 being the least frequent. So if we go back to our coffee example, we saw that the severity of the failure of getting a cold coffee was 8, and the occurrence of the failure, well, how do you determine that? Well, what you do is you look back historically. You inquire, well, did this happen in the past? That's why when you're doing a failure mode effect analysis activity, it's not a once-off meeting. No, it's over a number of days or a number of weeks or a number of months. You sit down and you do your FMEA, because in this case you might say, oh, well, I don't have that data at hand of how often in the past the coffee machine didn't work, so I will get it for you, and then we'll have another meeting and look at this new information. So in this case, we'd say perhaps a 3. It doesn't happen that much. It hasn't happened that much in the past, and we'll give it an occurrence rating of 3. The next component of FMEA is the detection. So this is a rating that describes the likelihood of detecting the failure mode before it impacts the system or the customer. So in other words, what is the chances of you who are working the coffee machine detects that coffee is cold before you give it to your customer? That's what the detection means. What's the likelihood of detecting the failure mode? And again, usually the rating on this scale is from a 1 to 10, with 10 being the least likely to be detected. So in our case, we could perhaps say that the detection of the failure would be a 2, meaning that there is a high likelihood that we will detect that the coffee is cold. Perhaps when the barista is pouring the coffee, they will notice that the coffee is cold in their hand. So that could, perhaps in this case, we'll give it a detection rating of 2. So now we have 3 numbers. We've got 3 figures, and now we're going to come up with another number, which is our risk priority number, or RPN. This is a calculated value that is used to prioritize failure modes for corrective actions. So in other words, we've determined the severity, we give that a rating number, we've determined the occurrence, we give that a rating number, and we've determined detection, and we give that a rating number. And what you do in failure mode effect analysis, you multiply the severity by the occurrence and detection system, and that gives you a RPN number, a risk priority number. And based on how high that number is, if it's a very, very high number, you have to action that particular failure mode issue immediately. And if it's a very, very low risk priority number, you might need to action it at all. Let's put it all together. And you put it all together by documenting it in one location. And this is why FMEA, I said, is a good, also because you document what you determine regarding failure modes and severity and so on. So here we're going to tabulate what we've just covered. Well, we looked at this one step in the process of making coffee, and we found that the failure mode was the coffee was not hot, the effect was cold coffee, the cause was the heating element failure, the severity rating was 8, the occurrence rating was 3, the detection rating was 2, and our RPN number, which we get by multiplying severity by occurrence and detection, is a number of 48. If we were to look at another step in the coffee making process, and that could be that the coffee was too hot, would be a failure mode. The effect would be you would have too hot coffee and could burn somebody. The cause again would be a heating element failure. The severity here would be a higher rating of 10, occurrence 2, and detection 3, and now we have a higher RPN number of 60. So what do we do next? Well, we prioritize. The whole aim of FMEA is determining the risks and what are the ones you really have to go after quickly. And we see from this that the coffee too hot has an RPN of 60. So therefore, this is our highest priority to deal with. And the next RPM of 48 is the one we would go after next. And in a typical FMEA, you might have 50, 60, 70, 80 different failure modes that you would have to work on. Again, this is just a high level overview of what FMEA is. So what we've learned is that the FMEA is a systematic method for evaluating processes, products or systems or designs to identify potential failure modes, determine their cause and effects, and prioritize the actions needed to mitigate these failures. And by addressing the failure modes in the order of the RPN, you ensure that the most critical and impactful issues are resolved first. And therefore this leads to a more reliable products, more reliable designs, and happy customers. And that concludes this short video. Thanks for listening. I hope you found it beneficial. And if you have any queries or we can help you with anything here at the Learning Reservoir regarding training courses or designing courses or delivering any of our courses from our catalogue, please just reach out to us.